Now today what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tell you to rethink China. I'm going to tell China to rethink itself. The purpose of this is because China is about to embark on, and has already started, its modern journey to the West. The Sun Wukong story, the Monkey King. And if China is going to be number one, if it's going to be at the top for at least a couple of years, according to one earlier presentation, and if that journey is going to last decades or even centuries, then it needs to change a few things, the modus operandi that it's doing today, at least I believe, specifically in relation to people. Now, I know what you're thinking to yourself. You're thinking, but everything's going so well. There's rumor of an 8.7% GDP growth. Yes, it is going so well. The world's been going gaga for China for at least the last 5 to 10 years. And we're finding the banks, the world banks are talking about China overtaking the GDP of America by between 2016 and 2025. The Australian government came out with a white paper. It was called Australia in the Asian Century. Now, this white paper was 320 pages but mentioned China 348 times. India was only mentioned 269 times, and little old Singapore only 70. And earlier we saw a presentation by Hans Rosling, Asia's rise then and now. And he says in his presentation that the average income per person of India and China will be equal to that of the West by 2048, only 35 years from today. And that's just the problem. That's just the problem. The average income of a Chinese is going to be equal to that of the West in 35 years, our living lifespan. Now, according to Monash University, an Australian university, they believe that the number of people in China at the top end in 2048 will be about 1.53 billion people. 1.53 billion. And if those 1.53 billion people are going to get paid an equal day's work for an equal day's pay for an equal day's work, well, things around here are going to have to change. Absolutely. They're going to have to change significantly. But let me take a step back. Let me and borrow from a little bit of a cheat card. I have been in China for 12 years, but I still need to occasionally refer to my Chinese. This word here, this sentence, 致富光荣. And you may know who said this. This was Deng Xiaoping. And Deng Xiaoping was on his southern tour in the southern state of Guangdong. He was not in power at this point, I should add, that he'd stepped down from the top job. But he still held a lot of guanxi. And in 1992, he was touring on his southern tour, and he said the equivalent of, to get rich is glorious. And suddenly, the entrepreneurial spirit, the business culture of modern China was reborn again. It was reborn. Now, if you were born in 1992, you'd be 21 years old. You'd be 21 years old. Now, I know my dad didn't want to give me the car keys, let alone the keys to the whole country. And that's part of the problem. Modern China today is a 21-year-old. The business culture, the entrepreneurial spirit is 21 years old. And that leads to other problems, of course. Have you ever been led by a 21-year-old? Have you ever had a manager who's a 21-year-old? Perhaps the only people in the room work for Facebook. Who knows? And that's part of the problem today. But let's talk about realities. Let's talk about the 3 realities that result from this 21 years. If you've lived in China as long as I have in 12 years, you'll know that these are significant problems and they are going to hinder China's growth as it journeys to its modern journey of the West. The first one is engagement, then turnover, and then management ability. Engagement. What is engagement? Engagement is the fire in the belly. It's the spring in your step. It's what gets you out of bed in the morning and run to work. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, if you own your own business, typically your engagement level is 100%. But in China, that engagement level is significantly low. 17% according to Blessing White. 17% according to Blessing White is a very low engagement. This is equaled by the Hay Group, and Hay Group says that China's engagement is third equal last, right next to the UK, and don't get an Australian started about British customer service and smiles. And just this year, the Gallup poll reported their 2012 results. They said it was a miserable 2% engagement, and now it's just a terrible 6% engagement. 6% of your staff in China are engaged, 6%. And we know that engagement leads to productivity, and productivity leads to GDP output. And so if China is going to become number one, if China is going to have that extended growth, it's going to have to improve its engagement. And what does low engagement result in? Well, the obvious, high turnover. No, not high turnover of revenue, but high turnover of people. People leave China, Chinese businesses, and they leave it in droves. Thanks to the global financial crisis, the rest of the world is experiencing low turnover. People are being less entrepreneurial. They're not taking risks outside China. But in China, relatively untouched, 19% turnover. Now, if you had a company that was 100 people, that's 19 people leaving every year, 19 people. That could be your finance department, your entire finance department, your entire R&D department, or your entire sales department. And when those people leave, what do they take? They take synergy, relationships, quality, and customers. And it doesn't happen steadily throughout the whole year. It actually comes in a big spurt at the beginning of the year, just after Chinese New Year. In China, we may have heard of the 13th month, the equivalent of the Christmas bonus. The 13th month is given to employees simply for turning up for the year. And then there's a holiday, the Chinese New Year holiday. And those young people, they go back home, they meet family, and they're often given hongbao if they're young enough. And so in their pocket, they have some money, some spending money. They can chill out, they can resign, they can quit. The smart ones, they put their CV online early, before they resign. Many are not that forward thinking, and they quit first, and then look for the job second. But 36% is the increase in the number of CVs that appear on Zhaopin.com immediately after Chinese New Year. It's a spike. Well, we have low engagement, we have high turnover, so who do we blame? Well, we have to blame poor management. After all, I said that modern China today is 21 years old. The spirit of the entrepreneur, the business culture is 21 years old. No one's dad was an entrepreneur. It doesn't run through the family. As we've already heard today, the billionaires are first generation. And so we have a series of people who are managing the employees, and this is affecting turnover. Don't take my word for it. Let's look at Stanford University. So Stanford University looked at 16 countries, asked them 18 questions, management questions, and they found that China was the worst. At the bottom. At the far your left, you can see North America, USA, and Canada at the best. Maybe it's slightly biased because they are, after all, Stanford University. But this result came out earlier this year. This is from Great Place to Work. The yellow you can see is Greater China, which includes Hong Kong, but is predominantly, the numbers come from Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong, Shenzhen. The far right, a dark purple, that's North America again. So 10 points behind, consistently, on management credibility, respect, and fairness. So this is the situation that we're in today. This is the problem. And part of the problem, I believe, is this expression, the 入乡随俗, which translates directly to enter the countryside, follow their culture. Or, as we would say in English, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And we've lost that. We've forgotten that. And when Chinese businesses go overseas on that journey to the modern West, when they're going overseas to expand their market, the market that they have to do if they're going to bring Chinese people to the same level of income by 2048. When they go over there, they forget this cultural rule. Now, what you can see here is a graph of multinational companies. Multinational companies that have been doing business, many of them for over 100 years. And you can see at the bottom there we have Ericsson. Ericsson, a Swedish company. We have Siemens, German, GE, American. We have a Japanese company, Hitachi. And you can see that the average there is around about 8%. Now, what is that 8%? It's turnover of locals outside their headquarters. So that's Ericsson, a Swedish company. Those are Americans working in America for a Swedish company. Or Siemens. Those are English working for a German company in England. Or Hitachi. Those are Australians working in Australia for a Japanese company. And that's the turnover of staff that leave from those companies. And then you have Huawei. So as you can see, the 4 years, these are the averages, the 4 years in 2009 as high as 42%. It's off the graph. These are foreign staff working for a Chinese company, that is Huawei, and they are leaving in droves. Now, that relationship with the employee, it trickles down, it cascades down into the community, into the relationships. And if you do a search for Huawei banned or ZTE banned, you get something that's quite disturbing. You get 2,800 to 2,500 results from a very specific request. And that's part of the problem, as you can imagine. And that extends out into the media, whether that's in the UK, America, Australia, or in Germany. That's the reality. That's the reality we have today. So things are going to have to change. China has to rethink the way it does business if it's going to have a modern journey to the West. Why? Well, that's obvious. What do they need to do? They need to hire the Romans. Now, part of the problem here is that there is a very strong mentality that there is a Chinese way of doing business and there is a Western way of doing business. I've worked in corporate training for 12 years, so I see it's alive today. There is a Chinese way of doing business and a Western way of doing business. And I disagree with that. I think there is a best practice. Because if you think about it, the word Kaizen is a Japanese word, and it means continuous improvement. And it's used by Ericsson, by GE, by Apple. It's used by multinational companies today. And according to the World Bank, the easiest countries to do business, or the easiest regions to do business with in the world are right here, Hong Kong and Singapore, right here in Asia. We seem to have forgotten something. We seem to have forgotten that people have been here before. The Japanese. The Japanese were here 30 years ago when they expanded to the West, their modern journey to the West. If you look at a Toyota, the top level of those countries, the top job of Australia is currently Japanese, but the top job in France is a Frenchman. UK, he's British. USA, he's American. They have Romans at the top of their businesses. Sony, even more so. Australians, French, British, Americans at the top of the businesses, running their businesses, assisting them, and making sure that when in Rome, do as the Romans do. But not using Western practice, using best practice. And the new kids on the block, the South Koreans, with Samsung taking it to Apple. Now, they're new kids on the block, so not all of them, of course, are non-Koreans. But we have French and we have British at the top jobs. And a stark contrast is the Chinese. Huawei, Chinese, 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 Chinese. And ZTE, Chinese, 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 Chinese. As I mentioned, this is it's a modern journey to the West, but they're not learning from those who've done it before. They're not even learning from their own culture. But there is a happy ending. There is a happy story. Some Chinese companies, they get it. And the one in mind is Haier. Haier, around the world, has Australians, French, Indians, and Americans at their top job. And as you might imagine, that relationship cascades down into the general community. If you put the word higher band into Google, you get something very different. You don't get 2,800 hits. You don't get 2,500 hits. You don't get 800 or even 80 results. You get 8. You get 8. 8 results. And this is the company that just bought Fisher Paykel, a New Zealand brand. And it only comes up with 8 hits. So ladies and gentlemen, I wish China best of luck. I really do. I think that China is going to be a wonderful country. China's expanding. It's on its journey to the modern West. But if it's going to be number one, it has to first of all rethink how it does business. It has to realize that there is no Chinese way of doing business. There is simply best practice. And if it does this, and if it rethinks the way it does business, then I'm sure China will be number one, not for a decade, but for a century. And therefore, I wish Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, the best of luck on his journey to the West. Thank you.